What is going on, guys? It is Ty the Jeep Guy, and we are out here in the beautiful Black Hills in none other than Judith the Jeep. And you have no idea how good that feels to say. All right, well, listen, there's been a bit of a hiatus, especially since I showed the video tearing down the motor that we put in there. There was a lot of different escapades that went on trying to get that thing in and get this Jeep back on the road. In this video, we're gonna talk all about it. But first, we've got a project we gotta do. All the seasonal trails here in the Black Hills open up in 2 days. Right now, we are out here at one of my favorite rock crawling routes, Jake. And there's actually a couple single track dirt bike routes around here. Well, I offered to help out the Off-Road Riders Association, get out and clean up some of the single track to make sure it's ready for the opening day of all the seasonal trails. Now, obviously, this thing's not a dirt bike, so I'm gonna go ahead and strap up my Lamborghinis, and we're gonna get out there and hike roughly a mile of single track and make sure there's no down trees or face whacking branches, things like that, so it's ready to go for the guys that are gonna be riding it this year. So I'm gonna grab my pack, lace up my boots, and we're gonna get to hiking and get this area cleared up. Ugh. This thing's been here for a while. Oh, it's a spitter. All right, well, now that that's done, we're back at the Jeep. I told you guys I'd tell you all the escapades that went into trying to get this thing roadworthy again, but I think I'm gonna go home and change, find a little different spot, and we'll get right into the story. I'm back, I'm changed. We're actually in one of my favorite parts of the hills, and well, I think I've said that a lot, actually. Let's be honest here, just the whole area, the whole Black Hills are just my favorite. So, but I promised you to go over all the things that went into getting this old creaky Jeep back out here. Quite honestly, we had a couple obstacles to overcome, some fitment issues with parts. At the end of the day, though, it's here. It's here. We've been putting miles on it. We've already done the first oil change. So let's just get right into everything that went into getting this thing back on the trails. Before we go into this, I just want to make sure and make it very clear, I had no idea what I was doing this whole time. Chris from Wrench Head's Garage kind of oversaw and actually had a huge role in this because, again, I had no clue what was going on. I'll be the first to admit it. When it comes to this stuff, like, I'm still learning, just like a lot of you guys that watch my videos. So do not take this as a how-to. I had no idea what was going on half the time. I just know I needed to turn the wrench and loosen and righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Yeah. All right, so where we left off was the motor was completely tore apart. It was a bare block, and we were going to reuse the block, the crank, and we were going to steal the tuppy head off the motor I had in here and use that as a part of the build. I did paint it a very bright yellow. I think it's like Ford Sunburst yellow. It does not match Judith, but in the engine bay, it looks great. From there, I ordered a lot of parts, and I think at this point, when it comes to building a motor, it's just take your debit card and swipe it and don't look. Just don't look. But I ordered a full rebuild kit from Clegg's Engines, and that experience was extremely smooth. I called for almost 2 weeks asking questions about what parts I was going to need, and cross-referencing things, and the customer service was incredible. The shipping was incredible as well. I ordered it, and then 2 days later I had everything, and so I was really happy with the experience I had. So the motor, I used a full rebuild kit from Clegg's. I did decide, so the cam on the old one was obviously used, and when I started doing this, the whole plan was to just build a short block. Well, I'll tell you later, that changed. So I ordered a new cam. I ordered it through Comp Cams. I did the Extreme 4x4 Sunday Extreme 4x4 Comp Cam. It's a 450 duration lift, all that fun stuff. All I know is it had a little acclaimer on the bottom that you can use it with a stock motor. So that's what I did. I ordered that, and I think it sounds good. Now that it's got some miles on it, you can kind of hear it. but it hasn't made a huge difference. It just is cool to be able to say I've got an extreme 4x4 cam. So yeah, that was another part that went in there. I also picked up a torque tube header from Banks, just because I've got a 2000 and the exhaust setup on that is super funky. So I pretty much only had one option, unless I went with Rugged Ridge, but I heard a lot of people had issues, fitment issues with those. So I figured just spend the money, get something that I know is going to bolt right up. So we went ahead and we went right to work as soon as the part showed up. The camshaft went in with brand new Durabond cam bearings. The crank, like I said, we reused that crank. When Chris spec'd everything out, the cylinder walls and the crank all came back within spec of what factory specifications were. So we just did standard side bearings, standard side pistons and piston rings, and yeah, so that all went together. From there, we kept bolting parts on. Something like that. Now, at this rate, we are moving extremely fast. The short block is pretty much together. The internals are there, so we started bolting on the accessories, the oil pan, and I decided to get a oil pan skid plate. It was a weld-on one, just because with how the 2000 Cherokees are, you can't get any of those aftermarket bolt-on ones to fit. So we had to do a weld-on. Now, I did experience major fitment issues with this oil pan skid plate. We tested it on an OEM oil pan, an aftermarket oil pan, and then I had a new old stock oil pan that I had tried it on initially, and none of them fit. It didn't fit on any of them. So Chris had to do some hardcore modifications to it, but it's on there and it's ready to get a light kiss of rocks throughout this summer. So that's on there. Now at this point, the short block was completely together. So that's when we decided to start pulling the motor, get Judith there, limp the Jeep all the way down to Chris's, pull that motor out, get the Tuppy head off of it, and swap it over to this short block and swap that motor in. So that's what we did. We started the process of pulling the motor. However, but then when we pulled the head, everything looked good until Chris noticed one of the valves was sticking a little higher than the others. So here is the 0331 Tuppy head that came off of the motor that was in Judith. I had it on the first motor as well. These are the stronger heads. They're casted a little bit stronger so they don't crack as often, but if you look, that is where our cylinder 2 misfire came from. Everything else sits semi-flush, right? All the exhaust valves, but we go to that one and it is sunken in there pretty good. So unfortunately, this throws a really big wrench into what we had planned, and quite honestly, I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. We were hoping to have the motor that we put together and that head together last night and then put it in tonight, but now we can't. So I don't know what I'm going to do, and that immediately stopped all the progress we had. It was a huge roadblock. It added like 2 weeks to what we were doing. So yeah, that I wasn't super happy when we found that. But it made sense where my misfire was coming from, because that was on cylinder 2 and wasn't anything else. So from there, we had a couple options, right? We could go through and send it off to a machine shop and have them machine that down and put an insert in it and weld it in. Or I could buy a reman from like O'Reilly's or AutoZone. Now, behind the scenes, my 2004 Grand Cherokee ended up needing heads as well. And I ended up ordering from Clearwater Cylinder Heads, and the quality that they were putting out for the price point was incredible. So I decided to just not mess with a reman, not mess with a machine shop, and just order a 4.0 head from Clearwater Cylinder Heads in Florida. And that was the best decision I made during this whole process. The quality, it was right there. The price point is what it costs to get a reman shipped to you. They don't require a core. Which the head ended up going to good use from the other motor, and that's a whole nother story. So that's when the process starts of us putting that motor into the Jeep. Now, another thing we installed while everything was out was the Barnes 4-wheel drive track bar setup, a Core 4x4 track bar, and their Barnes 4-wheel drive steering box brace. Now, I highly recommend the Barnes setup just because it was cost effective. The steering box brace made a huge difference in my steering. It feels way sportier, and the track bar setup just looks beefy as heck. You know, the welds, that's on us, so I guess we'll see, because right now I see all the XJ groups talking about SFR brackets and the welds breaking and stuff like that, but it takes all that out of it because they're your welds, so I highly recommend it. So after all this time, at this point I think we were going on about a month of the Jeep sitting in a shop. We were finally ready to get the motor in, and this will probably go down as one of my favorite memories just because all of my buddies showed up. I mean, we had Denver, Josh, Dustin, Noah, Chris was there. Like, everybody showed up, and it was just an overwhelming amount of support I felt from my friends to get this thing back on the road. And I will remember that forever. So thank you guys. Like, it was like a core memory. I mean, we had so much fun. I had a lot of fun anyway. And so we got the motor in. All right, I'm rambling, I'm getting soppy. So we get the motor in, and at this point, it is time for a first start.
So watch your eyes, here's something fancy or something. Yep. Where's the don't put it over there? Oh, then you take it off. Oh.
So as you can hear, the first start went incredibly well. The motor sounded phenomenal. And then all of a sudden, it just didn't want to work. So this is kind of when we just started throwing sensors at it, hoping that it would fix itself. But nothing was really working. Checking timing, ignition, fuel pressure, everything was looking good. We could not figure out why it wasn't firing. So one day I went over there just to kind of dink around and mess around and see what we can't get figured out. And Chris says, hey, I found your old camshaft position sensor and module on the floor next to the heater. And I'm like, okay, well, should I throw it back in? And he's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what that'll change. And I was like, well, that one worked. So keep in mind, this camshaft position sensor had about 216,000 miles on it. And the other one was relatively new. So we pulled the old housing, slipped the new housing in and the new sensor in. Chris aligned everything, did his voodoo magic, and we decided to give it a fire. And sure enough, it started right up. And it ran, again, beautifully. Absolutely flawless. So, yeah, here we are now. We've got Judith back. And just in time, spring is starting to fade out and summer is here. I have got so many things planned for this Jeep. But, there's a but. So I am currently, as I make this video, 800 miles into this motor being in, and I have been driving it every single day after work for pretty much to Custer and back every night, just trying to put miles on it. A sound has developed. We've chased the sound, but it definitely sounds internal. So I'm just gonna send it. I am not gonna mess with the process of pulling this thing out. I mean, how many 4.0s make noise and they're fine for 200,000 miles? No, I might be jinxing myself. So let's go find some wood to knock on real quick. Like, I'm grabbing you guys. Let's go. Now, don't get me wrong. At idle, this motor still sounds absolutely amazing. It's nice to finally have somewhat power again. Now, it's not going to win a land speed record, and it's not going to beat a 2023 two-door JL Willys Edition with the 2.0 turbo. Definitely not gonna beat that. But I can do 70 on the highway again, and I can just do my thing. I can drive it. It gets me places. Truth be told, I am a little bit concerned about reliability just because I have a couple big trips planned this year. And I want to make sure I can get there and back and not have a sight viewing hole show up in the side of the block or anything like that. So a little concerned, but like I said, we're just gonna spend the summer driving it. It's so good to have this Jeep back, and I hope it holds up because, man, we're not done with her yet. We've got too many adventures, and we've been on too many adventures to give up now. So now, since my last video, I've gotten like 300 new subscribers. So I want to say thank you guys for just kind of jumping in and having no clue what is going on. It's just, I post videos when I can. I'm just like you guys. I go to work every day. I don't necessarily have a place to work on my Jeep. You know, I use Chris's shop when I can, but I can't tie his shop up 24/7 with this. So it's like, you know, I'm in the same boat as a lot of you guys, and I like filming and doing this stuff. It's a lot of fun. I like sharing the adventure with you guys. So I hope you're along for the ride, because this summer I've got so many cool things planned, and I want to share it all with you guys. So I guess there's really only one last thing to say. You guys already know the drill. Get on out there and keep on Jeeping on.